This is Cathleen Scott, and welcome to the Cathleen Scott podcast. Today, I am joined by an amazing politician, Florida politician, Tina Polsky, currently serving in the state Senate, and also with my business partner, Gabe Roberts, who runs our Jacksonville firm. So, Tina, Gabe, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
You too. So Tina has an interesting background. She was a lawyer, like many politicians, but also serves as a mediator, a very conciliatory mediator, and a good one at that. I can vouch for that. She has been serving our great state of Florida since 2018, initially as a representative, and now as a Senate since 2020, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Tina, tell us a little bit about what committees you serve on, and just a little bit about you. What do you want our listeners to know about you?
Well, thanks for having me, Kathleen.
Sure.
We met, I guess, before I got into politics, and we've done some mediations together, especially in the field of employment law, which I practiced in back in the day in New York. And I just sort of fell into politics, to be honest. I was approached about an open seat. That was the state rep seat that I had in Palm Beach County in 2018 to 2020. And I was mediating like full-time, but not full-time every day. And so I was approached about this part-time legislative position. And this was all in the post-Trump era, where I was like pulling my hair out and, thought, well, you know what, maybe this is how I can make a difference. And a lot of women were running for office for the first time, and my kids were getting older. And I do have this, mediation business that's flexible. I thought, well, you know what, maybe I can make this work. And this sounded really interesting to me. So I just plunged in and did it. And that year I had a primary, but no general election. And that was the first time I ever did anything like that in politics. I had volunteered a few times, pretty lightly on presidential campaigns, but I knew absolutely nothing about state politics. So I had to learn it all. And I just, dove in, and it's been an absolute wild ride. I went from being in the minority in 2019, I guess is when we really started. That year, surprisingly, the Florida House picked up 5 seats. So we were 47, I believe, still in the minority, but, a good number. And then I moved to the Senate in 2020. Had redistricting in 22, ran again in a little bit different district. But ever since 2020, it's been super minority. And that's a big change. And that's really unfortunate and made it, very difficult to maneuver. One thing I like to tell people is that the Florida legislature is not nearly as divided as you might see if you watch, the federal Congress or Senate. About 95% of the bills pass unanimously. A lot of them are kind of business-related fixes, helping people in need.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because I had no idea. I mean, I had this vision of there just being this toxic culture and just like, so I'm so happy you clarified that.
It's true. And even as a super minority, this year, I think I passed the most bills that I've had. I think it was 4 or 5, or I had pieces of bills and as amendments and other bills, and, some decent appropriations. Now, the Senate, you do a little bit better than the House sometimes as far as appropriations, because there's 40 of us as opposed to 120 in the House. But, I have a lot of relationships with these people. I've been there a long time. You can get things done. I have always had good relationships with, the president of the Senate. And so you can get stuff done as long as it fits within the framework. And, I'm happy to talk about some of the things that I was able to get done and why. But I'm not getting my bill to clarify, medical exemptions for abortion. I'm not getting my bill on gun safety regulations that I've had for all 7 years and will continue to this upcoming year. There are just some areas they will not touch. So, you do everything you can to forward important policy. But probably the biggest thing we do in the minority or super minority is we fight the terrible bills. And although I just said that, 95% of the time we agree, and a lot of the bills are not terrible, there has been a huge uptick in the terrible bills between the years. I would say when I got to the Senate, so like 2020 to like 2024 was the height of the DeSantis culture war bills. And there was one year in that period of time we had 5 anti-LGBTQ bills.
Yeah.
And we had the abortion ban, I think it was like 12 weeks or 16 weeks. And then the very next year we came back with 6 weeks. That's unheard of. Like normally, you have something really drastic like that. You give it a little time, work itself out, see what needs to be done or fixed. But what happened was like, they just had to do more so quickly without even, that law was not even in effect yet when they passed the 6-week bill. So it was, it was so obvious it was a ramp up for his presidential run. They were completely beholden to the governor, and those years were really tough. So there was more disagreement and more frustration and more of these kinds of bills in that period of time than there were his first 2 years, my first 2 years as well. And then this past year, not nearly as many, because you may have heard how the legislature fought back. And that was the whole thing about the budget fights and why we went into extra time, because the House and the Senate wouldn't agree with the governor on a bunch of things. It started with the immigration special session. Then, of course, eventually there was a compromise and they caved a little. But there was so much pushback this year, unlike anything we've ever seen, kind of investigations and really interesting things into some scandals, this Hope Florida scandal, which I can explain. But there was much more independence of the legislature, which is how it's always supposed to be, right? An equal member of government. But it wasn't like that for this, chunk of period of time.
So I don't want Gabe to jump in because he's kind of, because he's really up on the legislative things. But I want to ask a big question. It felt to me, as somebody who's just watching these things unfold, some of these were like solutions in search of a problem. So
absolutely.
I just wanted you to weigh in on that. Like, were you having a lot of like parents calling you, complaining about how their kids are being educated in school and being indoctrinated by gay rights or things?
Yeah.
I mean, some of them really struck me as like, wow, like this is what we're worried about.
There's so many things like that. What happens is, and it's kind of like how Donald Trump speaks, is like a kernel of truth or like one incident and they just blow it up. Kind of like what's going on in Washington, D.C. now, with the crime, right? Like one bad thing and then it becomes everything. So what happened with a lot of this LGBTQ stuff in school was there was one parent who obviously had a very difficult relationship with her child, because the child, and this was actually in Tallahassee, the child told the teacher, wanted to be called, I'm not sure, they or him, I'm not sure exactly which it was. And they hadn't told the parent, or there was a school trip and then they had to tell the parent, something along those lines.
Right.
But this parent went nuts because the teacher knew something before they did, but clearly that's because the student couldn't talk to to his or her parent.
Isn't that a good thing? That's a good thing, right? Usually when
Right. Well, that's what we kept saying during all these bills related to school is like, shouldn't you be able to go to your teacher, your student counselor? Like there's a reason why. This actually relates to abortion too. Like one of the first things we did in abortion when I got there was related to parental consent. Like there was parental notification before I got there, and then they went to parental consent. And that was all about, well, the parent knows best and they should know. But obviously there's a reason why a 14-year-old girl is not going to go to her parent and ask permission. Like maybe it was the father, maybe it was the stepfather, whatever. Right. It's just, there's a reason. And so they kept promising us that the court system would take care of itself. Like, okay, so my kid lives in Boca Raton. They're going to get to a West Palm Beach courthouse and, fight for their rights. And then, as it turns out, the courts have not been particularly sympathetic. But anyway, that's a little bit to the side. Everything for them is parents' rights, parents' rights. That's what they branded everything as, from books to how you speak in school to curriculum. And so it was one incident where they were unhappy with how the school handled it. And you know what? Maybe they didn't handle it the right way. But then to take a problem that doesn't exist, like you said, it's not like it's going on. Like, I don't understand what they're talking about, the indoctrination. My children went through public school in Florida. I don't know what they're talking about. And to say that it's a real problem. And then they write this, as lawyers, you'd appreciate this, they write this vague language. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You shouldn't talk about things that make people uncomfortable. Like literally, that's like what the language is. How do you define that? And of course, it also makes the kids who have maybe, gay parents or a transgender relative feel very uncomfortable. And like, we kept saying, shouldn't you make the children feel comfortable? Make everyone feel like they're included. And they just refuse. Another good example of making something out of nothing. They thought the same thing was going on college campuses. Conservative voices are being muffled. The conservative students. I think what happened is one person called one conservative Republican representative and said, this is how I feel, or the teacher said this to me, the professor. So then what they came up with are surveys that they put out. And, that's not that big a
suggesting
deal.
The question and the answer, right? Yeah.
But the survey's not that big a deal itself, but it's like, so what are you going to do with this information? And as they did the survey, because they were so sure conservative voices were being muffled on campuses, and, they did put in laws to effect of, what can be talked about or not talked about, and have definitely chilled speech on college campuses. It's affected choosing university presidents, as you've seen. And the surveys came back and it's not the case. Of course, there's self-selection, like who's going to fill it out. But it turns out that the survey did not show what they were looking for. So talk about a problem that doesn't exist. And another one is transgender athletes. At the time we had the bill, there were 11 in the entire state. The Florida High School Athletic Association has laws or regulations on, how you decide if someone can play in the opposite sex sport. It was not an issue. Nobody was complaining about it. And yet it just blew up into this massive thing. And you know what the sad part about all this is? It takes away our time, which is 60 days only to pass bills and pass, billions dollar budget on this nonsense. So what happened in the meantime? Property insurance rates went through the roof on his tenure, that he could have been dealing with it, and he ignored it until he couldn't anymore. And then his response, tort reform, which, as we know, has not worked because no one's rates have really gone down. And that was 3.5 years ago, and they promised it would happen like in 18 months. So
all it's done is overcrowd the courts with all these cases and make it so that justice is being slowed down even more now.
And that, lawyers aren't going to want to take these cases because they can't get paid. And that's not fair to the consumers who've been paying their premiums all along.
That's right, because they stripped the attorney fee.
Lawyers can't get paid.
Yeah, they took away the attorney fees provision. So now a homeowner who is not getting their bills paid because their house was destroyed in a hurricane has to hire an attorney, pay out of pocket, and has no hope of getting that back as part of the damages. So it incentivizes the insurance company to deny,
Correct.
And then it makes it very difficult, which is why we have these fee shifting statutes so that people can get access to legal representation. It's such a misnomer.
That was a long answer to doing things that aren't necessary and ignoring the things that are necessary and creating a lot of frustration, hostility, and also the fact that it was a little less agreeable over those years than it had been because, he had an agenda and it was personal and it was political and ambitious and it affected all of us and all Floridians.
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot of great things in there, but I always thought of 2023, it was sort of like DeSantis was communicating through legislation, but the goal was never to actually implement or execute the law, right? They were passing these laws that were pretty clearly, patently unconstitutional. And like you said, a lot of them are written in this terrible, vague language that no one could ever actually enforce. But the goal wasn't enforcement or execution. The goal was the press conference when you passed the bill and you could say whatever you wanted to say it was about, right? And then somebody would file a lawsuit and usually Judge Walker in the Northern District would issue an injunction saying this is unconstitutional and the law would get thrown out. But they didn't care about that, right? They weren't actually doing this for parents' rights or for anything like that. They were doing this just to have a press conference because Governor DeSantis was running for president. And to your point,
no more in Florida. That's his big tagline, right?
But I'm so curious, like for you as a state senator going through this on a day to day, you talked about it a little bit in there, but how does that really distract and take away from the work that you're trying to do, right? If you're fighting these battles on these bills that okay, this is probably never actually going to go into law because it's so unconstitutional, or no one could actually enforce this because it's written in a way that I don't know what a school or a parent's going to do. But how does that still distract you from doing the work you actually want to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I say like a lot of our role is to kind of, ask them these really difficult questions, make them answer it, although they really don't. I mean, you should hear some of these answers. They're just these pat answers with, word salad that they love. And we point out the unconstitutionality of it. Even some of the bill analysis done by the Senate will point out unconstitutionality. But what's really interesting, it's so funny what you said. Yes, oftentimes the federal district judge will ban part of a law or all of a law, and then it goes to a very conservative appellate court. But the goal with the abortion law was to get the Florida Supreme Court to the now newly conservative, because DeSantis unfortunately had an opportunity to put 3 people on that court, to change the law. So they purposely want to test it, and they purposely want to get the law changed or approved by the Supreme Court. So they don't have those barriers anymore. The Supreme Court of Florida used to stop these bad laws.
Right. Yeah. Because the court was where the things got
yeah,
fixed.
it's the same thing you see the Trump administration doing with a lot of
it's the same federally, right?
They say, hey, go ahead and challenge this, because we know if you challenge it, you're going to just make it so that I can fire the NLRB commissioner just because I want to, even though that violates very clear Supreme Court precedent. When the president knows that the current court will overturn that precedent, he says, challenge it, I dare you. And it's the same thing happening here, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point, even when we'll say, and I had an interesting bill over the last 2 years, and like a little piece of it did get picked up, I'll explain, but that how are we paying for all these lawsuits? It's our taxpayer money. So as you said so eloquently, they are putting in laws that they know are unconstitutional, they know are going to be challenged, and then who pays for defending them? Okay, we have a attorney general's office that has several hundred lawyers, and yet they farm out all of that, sexy stuff to big law firms who are their friends. There is no request for proposals. There is no bargaining the rates. There is no database of how much money we're spending. And I remember, through the years when I would speak to reporters, I'd say, hey, have you done an investigation about how much we are spending on these outside lawsuits? And they said they can't get the information. That's another thing. They're very untransparent in this administration, and they are very, very slow on all their FOIA requests. And
then they'll fire the person who tries to put out the statistics on things, or what a few years
right.
ago. Right.
Yes, a lot of people have lost their job, like the whistleblowers, et cetera, in the state administration. So, it's costing us, the taxpayers, money to defend these unconstitutional bills that they know are unconstitutional, because half of them are lawyers too. So I've had a bill to require them to do those things, to, put out a request for services from several, it can't just be one law firm that's their friend. Just like everything else, if you're paving a road, you'd look for
you get an
best
RTP.
contractor. And to be transparent, have a database of what that's costing. I mean, there have been reports of $800 an hour partner fees, Washington, D.C. lawyers, and it's just not necessary. So basically what you're saying is the attorneys you have on the Attorney General staff can't handle this. And so part of it did get put into the budget this year. I think they kind of liked the idea. I had spoken to the Senate president, and I think it kind of snuck in that the Attorney General's office, when they did their budget allotment, there has to be some kind of accounting for how they're spending it.
Yeah,
but it doesn't.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we didn't get like that they have to request bids or anything. They just give it to who they want. But one interesting thing, I think it was a bill we had back in this time period we're talking about, that it was also when everyone was so angry at Facebook, right? For or maybe pre-Elon Twitter, where they would maybe, and I guess it was all, it's all post-COVID. It's all related to that. So when they were muffling, they thought that the Republicans thought that they were muffling their voices on Facebook, or they were shutting down some information. But they thought it was kind of related to candidates. So we had this bill where social media could not ban someone maybe while they were once they were registered to run in a race or something along those lines. But I think that bill got completely struck down, but I recall that this was the one, because there were several bills that had $1 million appropriation for legal fees. So they knew that, how are you going to tell a private company who can be on their platform or not? And that's what they were doing. Like, if you're a candidate, you can't be muffled. Well, if they say the wrong thing, then according to this private company, they should be able to do what they want. So I believe that law was completely struck down. But the fact that they were preparing to spend money on the lawsuit is just sad and pathetic.
I recall back when the Stop Woke Act, remember when they passed that one a few years ago, and Kathleen, I think you and I talked about that maybe in an earlier version of this podcast, where they had built a mechanism in there where if you were somebody who wanted to file a complaint with the state attorney general's office about your employer violating this new version of the FCRA under the Stop Woke Act, you as the individual, let's say you got fired and lost your job, there wasn't actually a mechanism for you to bring a claim, but there was a mechanism for the Attorney General's office to bring a claim, fine the company, and then those fines would go towards funding future litigation for the administration. Like, I remember that being a thing.
Yes, it was very similar to the COVID Unemployment Act too, where like you could, if you got fired because you were required to get a vaccine, it made it seem like there was actually some type of wrongful termination, but there wasn't. You could bring a claim and the company would be fined. And same thing, it would revert back to a litigation, I call it a litigation slush fund for the governor's office, which is kind of interesting. Speaking of other crazy bills, and I find it so interesting that Republicans have kind of branded themselves as the party for the working class, right? And that's for me, you know, watching that unfold over many years, and that's such an unusual, you know, thing for Democrats to not be viewed primarily as the party for the working class. But we keep passing these bills in Florida that are just like completely anti-employee. I mean, the most recent one being the Choice Act, which basically allows an employer to get an employee to sign a non-compete for up to 4 years. I mean, 4 years. You know, we know from like the research from the FTC's research that like that disenfranchises single parents, individuals who are afraid to make a change in their job, go make more money because they don't have the legal fees to do that. I find it so astounding. And the part of the statute that really is just like has to be said out loud and screamed from the rooftops, I think, the original non-compete statute uses the word competitive. So you can't work competitively. You know, okay, you own a company, your best employee goes across the streets and opens up competitively. All of us can go, okay, I wouldn't begrudge the company some basic protections for their rights and their proprietary information and the right to have that business, and probably that employee is taking with them the secrets of how they do things. I get that. We all agree as Floridians that is probably, you know, some basic protections for companies is needed. This bill does not use the word competitive. It uses the word similar. So what does that mean to your earlier point, like this vague language? What's similar? Does similar mean I can't work at any grocery store or just a grocery store that sells dog food if I worked at Chewy initially? Like what? Similar is everything. Everything is similar in some way. So really we're talking about 4 years of restrictions on employees and what's similar versus competitive. And it's so anti, I would not even to say it's anti-employee. Portions of it are really anti-company and business, because how are you ever going to hire anybody if everybody's locked down in these 4-year restrictive non-competes? It's kind of shocking to me. Did you have any involvement with that, Tina, on, you know, in terms of like when that was going through committee, or what was the general thinking about what this bill was going to do, if you know?
So I think I'm kind of in a unique position because there aren't too many people who have a background in employment law. And so I took it upon myself to fight this bill pretty hard. It didn't get the kind of pushback and publicity that it should have because, you know, so many other terrible things going on, and it just didn't seem like a big deal. It's probably a small group of people that it affects. But I really pushed back, and from all of my years working in employment law and as an attorney or mediating, it always seemed to me, and you would know this even better than me, that the standard that the courts will allow is like 1 to 2 years, even 2 years being like an outlier to uphold a non-compete agreement, because, you know, this is a person's livelihood. And so when I presented that, like, but if the courts are, you know, really only approving 1 to 2 years, how do you think 4 years is allowed? And again, it's kind of like, well, because we can, and this is what's appropriate. And these people know when they come in, and they justified it because there was like an income level, and to make it, you know, the highest earners.
I think it works out to be about $140,000 a year. Like that's the Palm Beach County. When you do the math, it's like 2 times the, you know, is it 2 or 3 times? I think there's a certain formula in the bill. But I know when we calculate for Palm Beach County, it's people who are earning over $140K a year.
Right, which, you know, is a good amount of money, but it's not like you're the hedge fund millionaire.
Right.
I mean, I think first or second year lawyers make more than that usually, or, you know, that's just kind of standard. So I don't know how many employers are going to use it. I don't know how many people will actually sign it. they kind of draped it in the idea of like economic development. Like, so many hedge funds and companies are coming to the Palm Beach area, and they were the ones who wrote this bill and were behind it, that they wanted to be able to, lock in these people and, create these crazy kind of agreements for a certain level of employee. And I don't know what the negotiations are or what they would get in return, but I was very uncomfortable with it and pushed back really hard. I'm not sure if it was one of those where, every Republican voted yes and every Democrat voted no. I don't really remember that. It might not have been that, like, I got to everyone to try to fight it, but it felt
like it got snuck in because it was so many bills that were on the governor's desk at that time. And we had reached out to several reporters, several representatives, and nobody seemed to really even know that it was there, frankly. And so it seemed like it kind of snuck through. And
we found out about it because we were at a Florida Bar Labor Deployment Conference, and someone was presenting on non-competes. And in doing his presentation, he came across this bill, and he was like, "Whoa, what is this?" And this is people on the Florida Bar's Labor Deployment Executive Council. We didn't know anything about this thing that was was about to be passed, and it just it got snuck in.
And it was interesting. The governor didn't sign it. It kind of, Florida has that unusual part of its law where if it sits on the governor's desk, it's automatically the law in 15 days. So it almost was like, did he know? Because there's a portion. So like the bill says, all right, you do similar work, you can be enjoined for up to 4 years. But it also says that employee can only set it aside by showing clear and convincing evidence. And in the language in the injunction says the court shall enjoin both the employee who's violating and in similar work and the company who hires them. It's a shall in the statute. And that can only be undone if, the employee or the new employer can come in and show by clear and convincing evidence. I mean, I'm not aware of any other, we have a nationwide practice. I have never seen a statute anywhere in any other state that is just egregious, frankly.
Yeah, it's very clear the way the governor did that. I mean, you mentioned before, Gabe, about big press conferences and signing bills and, proving his point. And so I think he had this struggle. I'm not sure exactly which group was protesting it. You guys might know, but I think he was receiving a lot of complaints, don't sign this bill, because otherwise he would have, signed it very proudly, because Ken Griffin is one of his largest supporters. And it was these hedge fund guys who wrote the bill and wanted this bill in. So I think he was torn between whoever was complaining to him that this is a terrible bill, I guess some employee rights groups, versus the hedge fund billionaires. And so I've never seen that before, because I came in with him in 2018, that he didn't sign a bill or veto a bill. I've never seen it just slide through. And it's a really weird way of something becoming law, because it doesn't have a stamp of approval. But if he didn't like it, why did he let it go through? Like, there are a lot of times bills that aren't that bad, he'll veto, and then you fix it and you come back next year. That happened to me 1 year, and it came back and I did it the next year, and it was fine.
Do you feel like there's not enough reporting on this? Like, I mean, this is like a thing that affects day-to-day people. I mean, to your point, it doesn't affect every employee. They're not being asked to sign these, but certainly people earning $140K are the type of people who are watching the news, at least theoretically, right? But there was like zero coverage on this. So what do you have any suggestions or recommendations for people who are out there working, raising their families, Floridians trying to do their thing? Like, how can we keep them apprised of what's going on?
Yeah, it is really hard. I mean, there's about 3,000 bills that are proposed every year.
Wow.
Senators have unlimited bill slots. Members of the House have 7 bill slots. But there's 120 of them. There's 40 of us. So there's, about 3,000 bills proposed every year. And you never know which ones are going to get a hearing. You don't want to make yourself crazy over a bill that's just sitting there, not going anywhere. So you have to really watch. And it's really on like advocacy groups, like your group, NELA, for example, could watch for anything related to employee rights. And they could have buzzwords. You can find a bill and get a notification if it goes anywhere. So if you were interested in a bill that I had, you could see the bills that I propose, you could mark it to be notified. And then if it goes anywhere, meaning if there's a hearing, you'll know. And then it is easy to watch everything on the Florida channel. They do make that easy, but it's obviously very hard to get to Tallahassee from South Florida or a lot of other places. It's important that people testify. There are advocacy groups who watch this stuff nonstop and, will alert people. Kind of like every profession has an advocacy group, a lot of, and then across the board, of course, environmental and voting rights and legal. So I think those groups really keep an eye on things, but it's hard. And we rely on folks from the outside to tell us, like, if you had seen that bill, say, Tina, this is coming to your committee, please watch out for it. Or, you're an expert in employment law. Can you ask these questions? How about proposing this amendment? Here are some talking points. And even testify, there. Or if you have, I know there's definitely some employment lawyers in Tallahassee, you have a chain with them and you say, hey, can someone from Tallahassee go show up at 10 o'clock on Thursday to this committee and explain why it's bad? Because people don't really understand. I think this is the perfect example of a bill that the layperson would not understand why it's bad.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound bad on its face.
No, it sounds like you're getting paid to sit out because it's called garden leave, and they talk about garden leave in there, but that's not required. So
And they make these bills when they describe them, it just smooths over, makes it easier for businesses to do these agreements. They're doing them anyway. We just want to, clear some hurdles and clean up the law. That's how they make it sound all the time. They won't explain it in great detail.
Right.
And you don't know that sometimes it's problematic. Now, we have analysts in our minority office. The Republicans have analysts too in the majority office. But our analysts have to tell us, so there's 10 bills on my agenda in judiciary, and they'll say, watch out for this one. And here's some questions to ask, and here's some talking points that, they found themselves, because then they're only looking at those 10 bills. So they will look at them in depth and say, okay, this is what we got to watch out for. Mm-hmm. Now, we have a week or a little less in committee weeks to review bills. But when we're in session and when things are moving fast, it's like a day.
Wow.
And so they could they call it a strike all amendment. So say this bill looks one way, and I've had it in 3 committees, and now it's on the floor, and they did a strike all the night before. I have to go get through a 50-page amendment that totally changes the bill before it's on the floor. And the floor doesn't have anyone testifying. Now, we can ask questions and debate, but they don't know what they're talking about. So it's nice when in committee, if you have experts there, like if you came, I could say to you, Ms. Scott, what's the normal procedure? What has been upheld in recent years or accepted practice for a non-compete agreement? What's the danger of this kind of law passing? And then you have a chance to talk about it, and I can ask you questions. But, after that's done, it's done. And so it's constantly changing, and it's slippery and scary, and that's how they sneak stuff in, especially at the end of session when everything is so fast, because it has to be done by X date. And so everything at the end becomes rushed and so poorly done, and such a bad way to legislate, to rush things through and make changes last minute. But that's the process.
So, Senator
really
Polsky,
curious.
What's next for you as you're resting up for the next session? I know Gabe has some questions too.
Yeah, sorry. From a strategy perspective, right? You mentioned earlier super minority. I think I've never heard that phrase, but it does make a lot of sense considering where the Democratic Party is in Florida. But from a strategy perspective, when that's where you are, and it's going to be hard to get the bills you really want to get passed, what is your strategy? I think I looked in the last year, I think you sponsored on your own, I think 25 bills, and a few of them got passed, but a lot of them touched on these hot button issues, abortion, gun rights, medical marijuana, things like that. When you are presenting these bills, I assume your ultimate goal, you love if they actually get passed, but there must be a secondary thing of, okay, this is never going to get through this legislature, but what is your strategy or goal behind presenting the bill anyways?
So I don't really get to present it. I just get to, as we say, put it into bill drafting and have it be listed as a bill under my name. I don't get to present it unless it gets a committee hearing. So your goal is, I'll give you an example, like let's say this notary fraud bill, which will interest you guys, is that a legal element. So in Hispanic culture or Hispanic countries, a notario publico is a lawyer. But here in Florida, a notary public is not a lawyer, but someone who signs documents or verifies signatures. So there were folks, especially in like heavy Hispanic areas, who were holding themselves out as immigration experts, as notaries, and that they could take care of your immigration claim. Well, they're obviously not lawyers, and they can't. Like I said, all they can do is verify signatures. So there was all this fraud going on. They, a family would give a notary $5,000, and I don't know if they were ever successful in helping them with their immigration status, but they clearly are not lawyers and should not be giving any legal advice. So it's already the unauthorized practice of law, and so. Basically, like kind of how it all works is I was presented with this idea from an immigration rights group. And they gave me an email, like a list of 4 ideas. And I was like, and exactly what you're talking about, Gabe, like this one stood out to me as, I think this could get passed. I once had a bill I was thinking about doing, like driver's licenses for, unauthorized folks. Well, that was never going to pass. I think in the end I didn't do that. But you look at what they're offering you, and obviously this is a progressive advocacy group, and they're going to want a lot of things. But when they presented this one idea, they understand the culture, what's up there too. Like only certain things are going to pass. I said, what? I think this could pass. Nobody likes consumer fraud, and they all say they want people to go through the immigration process the right way. So let's make sure that they have the right representatives. So I had the bill. I had met with some folks through the Bar Association to talk about unauthorized practice of law, for them to explain to me like how the process works, and basically, kind of like what my bill did. In some ways, it's a little overkill because it's already illegal to practice law in that way. But this bill just was like educational and talked a little bit more about remedies and gave it some publicity. And so sometimes that's what you do, even though it may not totally be necessary because it already was illegal, but it helps to shine a light on it. So I got as much information as I could. I guess we maybe drafted the bill in whatever way. Like I also wanted the buy-in from them. That's another part of the process. I don't want someone from the Florida Bar to get up in a committee and say, we disagree with this bill, which, happens, groups disagree with things and me not know that. So you want to try to clean it all out before you get ready to present. And so I had to really work the process, as we say, with the committee chair, who actually is the gentleman, the lawyer, who brought forth the choice bill, Tom Leake. I didn't love, like sometimes where the bill gets placed first is really important because you need that one committee. You have 3, but you have to get past that first committee. And if it had been judiciary that I sit on, I think we would have gotten on right away. But it was on maybe commerce because it's kind of dealing with a profession. So and I don't know that it was done intentionally, but Tom Leake made it really hard for me to get that bill on. So I remember I was in a committee with him and I handed him my bill. I said, come on, this is really important. You don't want people to get defrauded. And he took the bill, and during like a slow committee, he marked it up like a law professor, and he took this out and took the changes. But, it still kept the essence of the bill. And you can't have an ego with this at all. So right. Like, you like this, I'm going to change it, and you're going to hear the bill. So we did. And so he heard the bill because he was the chair of the committee. It's up to the chair of the committee to hear the bills or not. And so the bill got through, and then a lot of folks did support it. Nobody was against it. I can't remember if we had to make any other amendments along the way, but it passed overwhelmingly. So, that was really exciting, and it's an important, helpful bill, and it will help some people and stop some bad actors from, swindling people out of their money. But I hope that answered your question of kind of like, you take something, you mold it, you cut back a little on like what your ultimate goal is, so that you can get something passed, and you hope that the essence of what you're looking for, got passed, and it will help people. And I've had some success with some bills related to healthcare that were like that. You start slow, but you expand it year after year, and that's what's very satisfying about this job. Like a couple of the bills that I've done could potentially save lives or help lives in a real physical health way. So that's really important.
And what a good example of like using your mediation skills, kind of like reach across the aisle and have a little bipartisanship there too. That gives me hope.
No, it is like that though. I mean, you can't get it done without them. Like there's no, and you're stuck up there. It's like summer camp. You've all become friends. I mean, sometimes you have meals, sometimes you don't. When we have long days on the floor, we eat together, behind the chambers. You spend a lot of time together. And so you do become friendly. And, I'd say half the Republicans there agree with us more than their own party, but they just can't do it. And once in a while, you can get some Republicans to agree. And you have to pick and choose. But like, there will be one or two horrendous bills that they have that if we can get a couple of the moderate Republicans to be on our side, then they will talk to leadership behind the scenes and say, listen, if you bring this forth, there's enough of us who are going to vote against it, and then they won't bring the bill. Bills do not fail on the floor.
Right.
I think we had one or something, and then they do this reconsideration thing. And, the rules don't necessarily apply because they are in control. So they do what they want because they have the majority to change the rules. So if something they want to pass, it will pass. But there are some bad things that we have stopped. I guess the Democrats, along with maybe some moderate Republicans. But I can't go to like some of my colleagues that I know are more moderate and whine about every bill. It's got to be really specific and like, this is the one. This is the one this year. Right. And that's what they'll say to me too. Like, I got one chit to use. And so, maybe it was, we're never going to go to open carry as, guns, but we're no permit closed carry. Somehow that's like a line in the sand for some of these people, things of that nature. So you work with what you can, and that it is a relationship business. And yes, you try to mediate. I did have to say, like, I was very naive when I started, and maybe it helped me win, but I was like, I'm a mediator. I'm going to help, mold this and shift it. It's not like we sit in the back room with the Republicans and us and we come together and we create legislation. That's not, I don't get to do that. I don't get to mediate that way. But I guess maybe just the way I talk to people or the way I question on the floor or,
your conciliatory personality goes far.
Somehow
I think that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Somehow some of those diplomatic skills, work. Not in the traditional sense, but I try.
I've got to ask about at least one more thing, just because I'm presenting on it at a conference on Friday, and I want to have some credibility to name drop this podcast when I talk, which is, I know you've been trying, I think since you were a freshman in the House, trying to get a bill passed regarding medical marijuana and accommodations for public employees to be able to have off-site use. I'm really curious to hear sort of why that is, because if I'm right, you've been trying to get a similar bill passed every year you've been either the House or the Senate. Why is that an issue you've been trying to push for? Is it something you think will ever actually get passed? And I'm sure you've been following the case in Hillsborough County with the fire EMT, where the trial judge basically granted summary judgment to the firefighters, saying that they should have accommodated his offsite use with the medical marijuana card, and it's pending before the second DCA now, and we'll see what happens. But does a case like that give you hope that maybe next session this bill will actually get passed? Or I'm just so curious to hear kind of your story with that idea.
So it came to me, in a case similarly. I think it was a teacher who was a veteran, and he stopped a fight. Did a good thing, and he had to get. I guess he was injured to some extent, and was at a doctor, and they saw the medical marijuana in his bloodstream, and they had to fire him. And I remember I even spoke to the lawyer. They couldn't say much to me at the time, but it was, from my employment background, it's like, this can't be right. There has to be a way that someone who's suffering from a medical condition, who's using medical marijuana legally in this state, can't be fired for that. It's a whole complicated issue with federal law versus state law. I was really hoping that in the Biden administration, they were going to declassify marijuana. And then I thought I had a chance. I really did. But what I kept coming across when I would ask folks about it, again, the committee chair for whoever the bill was assigned to first, we can't do it because it's against federal law. They are also extraordinarily prudish about marijuana, as you know. And anything that's gotten done with respect to marijuana has been by citizen initiative, the medical marijuana, and, they tried for the recreational marijuana. So they don't like medical marijuana, and they've tried to curtail it, even though it's in our Constitution now.
Yeah, I remember, just to jump in briefly there, when I was in law school, I took a class on medical marijuana law. It's like a 1-credit class you have offered on a weekend, and the professor had, and I forget his name, but the individual who had introduced the enacting legislation after the amendment passed for medical marijuana. And I remember him coming to our class and just being so proud of all of the little poison pills and things that they had hid in this bill, where he was just like, yeah, I know the amendment passed, but we didn't want that. So we threw this in and we threw that in. And I just remember he was so happy about the things they'd gotten passed in the enacting legislation. So it just kind of support what you're saying there.
Yeah, after these constitutional amendments, they'll pass, like the one restoration of felons' voting rights. Mm-hmm. That was right in the beginning of when I was in office, and we spent so much time chipping away at it. And, there was fights over what was the intent of the language. And so they've done that, with medical marijuana too. And then this came up about, some public employees being fired. So I think the first iteration of my bill was for all employees that, medical marijuana can be the reason, if it's not affecting your performance, why you're fired. Of course, it didn't go anywhere. And so then, kind of like what we talked about, that every year since, it's like I've tweaked it a little to make it a little narrower. Then we said just public employees. Then maybe it was just state employees, just so we could get somewhere and make a dent. But until I think that it's scheduled, if that's the right word, then I don't think it's going to go anywhere, because they kind of don't have to. But what I was saying, how they pretend that they're anti-lawsuit, which is the basis of all the tort reform stuff. I said, you are going to have lawsuits, because this is an accommodation that the company or the state agency should be allowing, and this is a violation of the ADA. And I thought that was the road in, because they don't.
And I think there's a little bit of hope here, because I think somebody has just figured out that you can do a mouth swab that will now test, because one of the big arguments that employers make is that, well, we don't want people high at work. It's a public safety issue, right? Mm-hmm. And you can understand that, operating heavy machinery, driving, fine, I'll give them that. So, but now the mouth swab should be able to say for 4 to 6 hours, as I understand it, whether the level in the mouth. And so that's always been a challenge that I think was on the side of kind of the naysayers as to why you shouldn't accommodate a medical condition and someone's choice to use medical marijuana as their choice of drug. But I think so hopefully that'll give us a little bit of hope to be able to say to the employer, yeah, but you could now do this. Because that's the issue, right? If you would get tested medical marijuana, you can't ever tell if someone was actually high at that moment in time. Like in your example, the guy who was, in an altercation or stopping an altercation, it's just going to show up in his bloodstream. We don't know from the level, if he was impaired at the time that they.
If you're a daily user, it might be in your blood or urine for up to 90 days. It sticks around.
Right. Yeah. And there's I've always gotten a lot of press about this bill, but never got a hearing. And I would try to talk to people about it and say, but it's okay to be on Percocet, and teaching in a classroom.
Or Xanax. There's so many other alternatives now.
That are much worse to how someone might act and really affect their ability to do their job. Of course, we had exceptions in the bill for public safety and driving vehicles, et cetera. But it's tough with the firefighter. Like, I don't know where the line is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is not an easy decision, and this legislation doesn't have all the answers. And even if somehow this legislation passed, of course, there could be, lawsuits about it and where the line is or where it isn't. But, I was also willing to, as I kind of talked about the process that I did with the notary fraud bill, there's a process that we could go through where the folks, the experts could help craft a bill that makes the most sense, that really does exempt, public safety kinds of things. But there's no reason why a teacher shouldn't be able to use medical marijuana at home who's battling PTSD. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing. So many of these people are veterans, they're heroes, firefighters, they're heroes. And we pass all these bills to help them. I mean, everyone loves patting themselves on the back about, veterans back to work programs, homestead exemptions, all these things, hometown heroes for purchasing your first home. But then when it comes to helping an actual veteran who's using medical marijuana for PTSD, we're going to fire him, and that's that. And so, to me, I just saw it through my, labor law lens and just said, this is illegal. If medical marijuana is legal in this state, there has to be a way to use it and work in the public sector or frankly, in any sector. And
I think we're making some progress on that. I think, though, in the courts on that issue, particularly in the private sector. I mean, there are cases now where we've had some positive outcomes where individuals have recovered for being fired because they have. And the distinguishing factor is what condition do they have that they take it for. That condition has to rise to the level of a disability. And so I think we're making some progress on that point. But if it's a situation where like a recreational user has got a medical marijuana card because they want to recreationally use marijuana. Obviously, that's not going to fly in the workplace as an accommodation. But I feel like maybe we're making a little bit of progress on that front through the courts.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of the same analysis that goes on with any reasonable accommodation, is it really a disability or not, is perfectly fine. Like, I see this in the world of an ADA suit, and And
at the end of the day, just go through the interactive process the way you would for anybody, right? And that's all you have to do.
But I'm not hopeful that it will pass. You know how Ron DeSantis feels about marijuana. He spent all of our money fighting against it, taking that. That's what I alluded to. I'm going to go full circle here. I alluded to Hope Florida scandal. He took our taxpayer money from a Medicaid settlement with the state and used $10 million to fight against Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 of this past election, which was the recreational marijuana and the abortion amendment. And that was money meant for the state because we had overspent on Medicaid provider. And there was a big settlement, and they took part of it, funneled it through this organization that Casey DeSantis started called Hope Florida, and put out these ads. And in addition to that money, he still used state money with agencies like our healthcare administration. That's our, state money to put out ads. And so this governor is never going to sign a bill that does anything to help anyone with marijuana, even if it's a disabled veteran, using it for the right reasons. So not that I won't propose it again, because I will, but, I'm not, you asked me what I think the chances are, and I don't think that they're very good.
Yeah, I think it's our chances through the courts, right? Hopefully the second DCA, affirms the summary judgment order in that case, and then if the Supreme Court grants cert, they agree with it. But that's kind of where it needs to go, I think.
Right, and so then in 2 years, I'm going to run in with the bill and say, this is it. Now we've got to codify this, or maybe the Supreme Court would say, hey, legislature, you got to fix this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
let's hope.
Yeah, or maybe by then they'll, a recreational amendment will get passed, and then the entire medical structure goes out the way because the poison pill they built into the Medical Marijuana Act that says if recreational ever gets passed, then all of this goes away anyways. So it's it's a whole lot of moving parts there.
Right. So that is going to be back on the ballot because they have the money to do it. Mm-hmm. The True Leaves of the world, and they're going to try again. We had a pretty terrible bill. There's always like one horrible election bill every year, and this year it was on the Citizens Initiative process. Mm-hmm. And so I just mentioned Amendment 3 and Amendment 4, even though they failed because they were like 56, 57%, and you need 60 in this state, but the overwhelming majority did want these laws. They thought, oh, that came too close. We got to stop this. And they pretended that there was all kinds of fraud that went on with gathering these petitions. And so it's going to be a whole new world where people who gather these petitions are subject to felonies and to be citizens, although that's being fought in court. They're really on the line if there's anything wrong with the petition. The craziest part about this bill is, if you do a vote by mail ballot and you fill something out wrong, they could call you and say, oh, you need to cure this or come in, show us your signature, do whatever. Like they want your ballot to count, right?
Right.
So the opposite is true for this. If you signed a petition, you're walking to Publix and you sign it.
Sure.
You're going to get a card in the mail now because of this law that's going to say, Kathleen, did you mean to sign this?
So you have to sign twice, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't reply, then your petition counts. But if something's wrong with your petition, if for some reason you wrote Broward County instead of Palm Beach County, they're going to throw it away and they will not send you a card. Mm-hmm. So you have no idea that it wasn't counted. And so if you forgot or you weren't sure and you filled it out again, you could be subject to a felony or a misdemeanor. So people are going to be scared, and they put more information in. So especially to a stranger, like maybe with me, you would fill it out and I'm going to send it in. But if a stranger at Publix is filling it out with a clipboard, you're not going to want to give so much more personal information. So they're trying to discourage people from signing petitions.
So why are the Republicans so afraid of the average person, the working class person?
Because everything good in our Constitution has come from citizens' initiatives, but they hate all of them. So minimum wage, restoration of felons' rights, medical marijuana, fair districts, some environmental legislation, small class size, all these things, because the average person, obviously 57% of Floridians do not want these abortion restrictions, but the legislature passed it anyway. So they're not listening to their constituents. It's kind of like the redistricting and everything that's going on now.
Yeah.
So they're not listening to their constituents. They do it anyway. They don't want to be told what to do by the citizens. And so the citizens in Florida have this opportunity for these initiatives to get on the ballot, and sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. But every year that I've been in, they've made it harder and harder. They keep pushing the goalposts because they don't want this. The Chamber of Commerce did not want minimum wage increases, right? And so they fight it and they fight it. These outside groups plus the legislature, they want to make the laws and they don't want the citizens interfering. And so, people who are listening who are kind of involved in that process, they just need to be careful and make sure that they're following the rules and, just sign up to be a petition gatherer and do whatever steps that requires. So you're allowed to collect however many and send them in. Otherwise, 25 max and you're done, which changed at first it was 5. Like, are you kidding me? There are people at senior homes that collect for the people there.
Sure.
Things of that nature. And so they just don't want to hear from the citizens. They want to control.
Wow. Well, Senator Polsky, we so appreciate you coming here and sharing your views, and also appreciate your service and your tenacity in dealing with the legislature. It's been really informative, and I really, really appreciate it. Anything you want to say in your final comments for anyone listening, please do.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, the thing I like to always end with is how important it is to vote in every election, every special election, every local election. You can see why it matters. What a supermajority does. They just control everything and there's no balance. Changing a few state house seats could make a really big difference. And so I want people to care about that. And I want independents and moderate Republicans to say, I want balance back, because they're not following the rules and they don't think that they should have gone all the way on abortion, and they don't like that they're taking away their right for citizens initiatives and all the things that we've talked about today. So if you care about a balanced government and you don't want one party to have complete control to the point that it's, so dysfunctional, then you got to vote. You got to vote for local electeds. And, maybe you don't love some of the Democrats or some of the general party things, but look at the candidate and look at the people. I know I'm very different from some of the people I get squished in with. You can tell the way I, can work across the aisle and be bipartisan. Everything is not, crazy flame throwing. Everything is not crazy progressive. Look at these Democrats, get some more Democrats in office, because then that will create balance. And that's what we need. The Republicans are still going to be in control, but we need more balance. So you have to register every 2 years to get your vote by mail. If you voted by mail in the presidential November 24 election, you no longer have a vote by mail request in. So go online, fill it out for yourself and your family that you all want to vote by mail ballot. You don't have to use it. If you like to vote in person, that's just fine. Just throw away the vote by mail. But keep it. You can see who's on your ballot. You can research it, and you can be ready to go. And if for some reason you can't vote in person, send it in. So it's perfectly legit. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But just get involved and watch what's going on in Tallahassee, because it can be some dangerous stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Good to see you. We so appreciate your time.